traffic signs flashing to thrill the sky. But what they don't know, this thing is still leading me on over the world. How long will you be away?
You know, there comes a point in your life when you realize you've spent a lot of time on menial things that have no real consequential value to yourself. Back in the early 1920s down in Staten Island, time-wasting hobbies consisted of collecting baseball cards, hanging out at the local speakeasy, or reading a work of fiction. Nowadays, in the modern age, our ways of killing time mainly involve digital content in some way, shape, or form. This may consist of watching videos of people playing games, watching videos of people playing games, but they're talking over the game, watching people slog through that very same game again, but this time really fast. Watching people play games against each other. Watching people play games against each other for money. Watching people play games against each other for a lot of money after getting a room service hooker. Talking about games yourself. Talking about games online. Talking about games online in a video format. Being confused for a white citizen while talking about games online in a video format because you learned how to speak English without using hooked on Ebonics. In the time you spent doing those various things, you probably could have learned a valuable skill. A real, tangible skill that would make you money. Not TJ Maxx money or wherever it is you work. Real money. Money that lets you escape the typical American life cycle on the debt plantation. You know, the cycle of having your time sucked away by some Beth, Tammy, Susan, or baby mama by any other name who needs your help to find a new stroller for their newborn child, despite strollers being the first thing they see when they enter your place of work. This is, of course, after you've mindlessly uttered the monotonous words of rewards card to another more successful human being who does not need your petty offer for the 100th time that day, leaving you to watch as he takes his supermodel wife out for a celebratory seafood dinner for their 1-month anniversary, transported by his obnoxious supercar that he'll never drive at full speed. You go home after your 12-hour shift because without the overtime you'll surely starve to death. You're too tired to do anything productive, but you have just enough time to masturbate, both physically and mentally, to the idea that maybe tomorrow you'll finally get the ball rolling on that big life-changing project you had in mind. You could start now, but there is always tomorrow. The very idea of that possible success comforts you until it's time to wake up and do the whole thing all over again. But hey, out of those 365 days in that year, you get to have a whole 48 of them to do whatever you want. After all, if you don't work 6 days a week, you will surely starve. But what to do with your time off? You don't particularly like anyone from work, and everyone you used to know is long gone. They're either just spending time with their own families, having lavish getaways to Plumouch, Brittany, or dead. It's really only ever one of those three things. You could use the fleeting time you have remaining to get the ball rolling in the direction it needs to go to improve your life standing, finally hit those books and learn that real valuable skill. But before you finally get on the right path, you notice it's kind of dirty in here. You do some cleaning as an excuse to procrastinate, and you come across something familiar. Something that triggers that sense of nostalgia which derails any attempt at self-improvement you were pretending to make. It's an old Rubik's Cube, one that you used to fiddle around with as a child. Sitting in your hand is 42 quintillion randomized possibilities. 42 quintillion new ways for you to challenge yourself. 42 quintillion new excuses not to do something about the water not coming on. You've already played with this thing before. You've already seen what it has to offer for you. It's literally nothing, but the way it offers that nothing is nearly endless. Maybe this time when you randomize those colors, you'll get simple patterns to work from. It'll just be a quick distraction. Then you can get right back to finally putting in that work. That life-changing work. But the pattern you started working is a little more difficult than you expected. It's a little harder to solve than you remember it being. You know you can, it'll just take a little more time. You're so very close to getting started on the path to life redemption. But slowly you find yourself sucked back down the rabbit hole of pattern recognition and puzzle solving. That's fine. There is always tomorrow. A game randomizer is the concept one conceives of after you played a specific game so much you know the exact moment when a specific NPC is walking down some stairs on their set schedule. You've played the game so much, you can beat it blindfolded through normalized movement, sound cues, and a level of Rett syndrome that's just perfect for the controller you're using. You've played the game so much, you fail to realize you're now socially incompatible with most normal functioning human beings. The main source, nay, the only source of your personal enjoyment, can now only come from this. But you need it to feel new again. Your game is fun, but how great would it be to experience it like it was the first time, again? No, not that time. Like a Rubik's Cube, the randomizer takes something with a clear goal and shuffles everything around indiscriminately. Either with the finesse of a seasoned professional elegantly laying out a feasible challenge that anyone casually into the hobby could beat, or an angry chimpanzee who's constantly being yelled at to perform on a unicycle despite just being abducted from its mother. Both scenarios are doable, but one requires a more deft hand. Randomizers are usually carried out in the manner your abusive parent probably conducted themselves in your household. They come into your space, take your things, and just throw them around while you helplessly watch. You try your best after all of the chaos to remember how things should be. You know where the most important things should go, but the little details begin to get hazy. You slowly come to a realization that maybe you didn't know your own room as well as you thought, and not only will you have to search this disaster of a space, you're also going to need to climb out the window to the neighbor's balcony to get back your favorite Naruto figurine the parent who actually cares bought for you. Getting to that precious item of yours will be a more cumbersome task than if it was just on the display shelf where you had always left it. Sometimes after the randomizer throws its tantrum, you get lucky and find that the 9mm you've saved up to purchase for when things get too out of hand is still somewhat near its original location. But for the most part, things are not where you left them. When randomizers choose to get even more hopped up on the drugs the previous generation spent their whole lives campaigning against, that abusive parent not only throws your anime figurine outside onto others' property, they also ascertain godlike powers, the likes of which mortals cannot comprehend, then physically bend space and time to make climbing out your window lead you directly to the top floor of famous French restaurant Les Plats de Eugène. Upon entry into the space of fine dining, you are then shot by the Los Angeles Police Department, who have also wandered into that same restaurant 12 times. Because despite not belonging themselves at fancy French restaurant Les Pièces de Eugene, they know you do not belong here even more. Randomization is an interesting concept, but the game it's attached to will heavily determine the quality of your experience. See, when that abusive parent chooses not only to destroy your room, but instead beat you, the child that looks like Quasimodo, the police may not be able to tell much of a difference. They know something has changed, but not very much, compared to when they savagely bash in the face of your attractive cousin who had just signed on with their French modeling agency at fancy French restaurant Les Pièces de Eugene. Beating you simply will not compare when trying to file the charges. The damage done to you is questionable at best, while the damage done to her is undeniable. If you can't already tell from watching, Majora's Mask is your hot older cousin, and unfortunately for her, she's much more engaging when she's receiving some kind of physical abuse. Don't worry, I've already turned myself into the authorities prior to this review. My assets have already been seized and the keys to the channel have already been handed over to a complete stranger. Majora's Mask by default has a layout that would facilitate replays very well, if you were allowed to play the game in any order you wanted. You can shake things up in the vanilla experience, but only if you're familiar with the art of exploding your body continuously so that you can tell gravity to fuck itself. The main game's hub sits in the center of a nice and simple map. There's only 4 primary directions you can wander off to, and each subsequent land only spans about 2 or 3 major loading zones, not including the mini-dungeons. Normally, you would go in the direction the game tells you, you effectively hit point B, then you warp back to the center of the map to do the same thing in a different direction. You're forced down this specific routing because some tasks you can accomplish are dependent on what items you have in your inventory, or more specifically, if you have the bow in your inventory, and if you can utilize supernatural magic powers with that bow. Each area has an arbitrary block because on paper they're supposed to keep you from wandering around the entire map aimlessly trying to complete quests you physically can't. The theory is that by the time you have the items you need to access these spaces, you'll also have the other necessary items you need to complete the main quest and various side quests. The entrance to the mountains is blocked off by some ice since the summer temperature of the fields just suddenly drops enough to maintain this solid slab at this specific spot. The only point of entry and exit to the ocean is fenced off, the massive border simply too high for a young man to jump. The last area is accessed when a dead woman, whose face might just be a giant glowing eyeball, summons a tree for you to use a grapnel device because she likes what you're wearing. Besides the canyon, which requires a comprehensive inventory to navigate its lands, mini-dungeons, and main dungeon, the other 3 compass directions give out most of the things you need to complete that section. The pivotal mask, as well as other staple items the main dungeon requires, will be hanging around conveniently in the same general location. The bow and subsequent upgrades are really the only items being extra, as the kids say. But as far as the masks go, the swamp is the intended first area, so only Deku Link is required. Deku Link isn't required to complete any of the mountain area, and if Pirate's Fortress didn't require this fat ass to hit this one switch, Deku and Goron Link would not be required to complete the ocean. Honestly, with a few tweaks, the game could be set up so that you could choose to do the swamp, mountain, or ocean in any order you want before allowing you to enter the canyon, because there's really not many puzzles that restrict you when you first encounter them. This is the residual effect of Link's smaller item loadout and tying old items to transformation masks. The hardest thing to complete will be the spider houses when they're done out of sequence. Most other things are just walled away with some stupid barrier you either need to shoot or explode to justify the game's linear structure. But alas, this theoretical non-linear game isn't the one we got, and hey! What's this? Why, hello there, Randomizer. Nice of you to join us. It'll throw its alcoholic tantrum and allow our navigation of the world to drastically alter depending on the items we find. Good stuff. So what does this mean for how we get around the map? Well, the simple layout of the hub being in the center means that traveling the land of your abused cousin is rather simple, never taking any longer than a few minutes. Easy by default, easier when you cosplay as a woman working at a fetish cafe, and even easier when you put on 300 pounds and let your momentum carry you like you're traveling to a Dunkin' Donuts. By default, the game would allow you to warp to significant locations on the map by playing an instrument your crush threw at you, while a man several times her age was trying to assassinate her. Playing 6 notes in the correct sequence will cause you to sprout wings and then spin around until your body evaporates. But in the home of your abused sibling, the warp whistle may not be where you'd expect, and you'll likely be forced to use your several legs. The only time where you might be hurting for the space-time teleportation jutsu is if you need to repeatedly climb up a tower by playing the waifu instrument to shed your skin onto 9 switches, so that floating blocks will move themselves in range of your stubby legs. The medieval period was certainly a different time. For the most part, however, travel is simple enough, which is good, because the routing for the game will go from these nice and easy straight lines to chaotic infinity symbols representing the amount of time you will spend trying to find your next item, and the amount of time you'll likely spend waiting for your dad to come home from the 7-Eleven. What really adds on to the appeal of this specific randomizer is how the game's default time mechanics come into optimizing your routes. For the 5 of you that still haven't played this game but for some reason are watching a video of some guy blab about a mod of a game, a lot of things Link does is tied to the 3-day clock. It will determine when he can help certain people, when he can speak to certain people, when he can access certain areas, when he can modify his weapon beyond the legally allowed limits, and more. It's the game's central gimmick. Link has 3 days to do everything because on the 4th day, a child throws a celestial body into the planet at a rate of 6 miles per hour. The impact naturally destroys the planet, and we don't want that. We would rather die slightly later on when we go back into the woods only to get lost and starve to death, than have our soul transform into a wolf, as souls naturally do when left out into the wild. Then we can tell somebody else how to not spend their life wandering around like a stalker trying to find a person who chose to leave you. 3 days. That's all you get. Time controls a lot of side quests, and certain items are tied to certain side quests. This means not only are you wandering around a full game map trying to find the full item set to complete the game, you'll have to be intimately familiar with what you can do depending on what the current time is. And because side quests give out major items, they essentially act as another location for you to check. Only this location isn't statically waiting for you to approach it at your leisure. You need to approach it how it wants you to approach it. Otherwise, it'll probably alert the authorities that some creep dares to speak to it with such a casual tone. You'll then be arrested again, another one for the record, a life doomed to never enter corporate America, or Hyrule, or whatever the equivalent of a desk job is in this universe. There he goes, there's that loser, wandering around the woods, says he's looking for fairies, which is probably slang for angel dust. So you have set locations, which could house your items. Then you have dynamic locations, which could house your items. The items you need to beat the game. Some of these set locations demand that you have an item before accessing it, and some of these dynamic locations demand that you have certain items to access the reward. The result is that you'll usually begin each session searching certain spots that are easily accessible regardless of item status or time, and from there what's given decides your routing. But you have to be able to recognize that you are able to take the route the game is handing out, because like static locations you probably never knew existed, some items allow you to do things you've probably never considered trying. How well do you think you know this game? I thought I did, but I also thought I would grow up to be a regular adult with a regular adult life, but here we are, YouTube. Deciphering the route and optimizing it on the fly is what makes Majora so appealing as a randomizer. It has far more moving parts than the standard randomized game. The world isn't massive, there's a lot crammed into a small package, and it's very accommodating to what game randomization entails. Utter chaos. It fits almost like it could be some type of unlockable mode. Like it's just in its DNA to be attracted to violent abuse. You'll give it all the counseling and therapy it needs, but there it is the next day, doing the same shit in a slightly different way. And that's what keeps it interesting. You don't know if today if you're just going to go down to the grocery store to pick up some greens and cauliflower, or if the grocery store will warp you to the meth lab for a knife fight and police chase. Anything is possible. Well, except for Eternal Youth, Peace in the Middle East, a faithful reboot of Johnny Bravo, your hopes and dreams coming true, a good 3D Sonic game, a cure for the common cold, free and infinite energy, surviving in the vacuum of space, traveling back in time to get the time you wasted watching this video back,